It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. No ceasefire extension yet and no end to the misery as Hamas claims the baby they took hostage has been killed in an Israeli airstrike alongside his brother. Suppliers under fire and parents under pressure as the competition watchdog finds that consumers are paying too much for baby formula. Lost in translation, how a Dutch version of a book on the royal family came to name senior royals allegedly involved in a racism row. Keeping climate talks on track in Dubai despite controversy over the host's commitment to cleaner energy. Plus, we hear from the crane driver who rescued a man from the top of this burning building in Reading last week.
I heard the cage go down and the banksman said, he's in. So, then I heard the crowd outside, they were all shouting as well.
And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Good evening. A ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas is due to expire in the coming hours as international mediators work towards an extension. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reaffirmed his commitment to destroying Hamas once the fighting resumes. But the claim tonight by Hamas that a baby, the youngest hostage held captive in Gaza, has been killed alongside his mother and brother, has underscored the danger to hostages still being held. The group's military wing claimed that the three died in an Israeli airstrike. The Israeli military blames Hamas for the deaths. The release of hostages continued this evening with 10 Israeli and 4 Thai hostages freed. Here's our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey.
The ceasefire clock is ticking down and everyone in Gaza knows it. In the calm, people have been flooding to hospitals, looking for treatment and almost overwhelming doctors. There is a real fear of a major spread of disease amongst the civilians who are largely homeless and barely finding enough food to survive. Aid deliveries have continued both to the south and north of the Strip, and the quantity of it has increased, but agencies say it's still hopelessly inadequate, and so do the people who are waiting for help.
This is the third day in a row standing here to get flour because we frankly don't have any. For a week or so, our children were having one meal a day, barely enough to keep them alive because Gaza has nothing to eat except some vegetables.
People are increasingly desperate and they know that when the war resumes, life will get even worse. Hundreds of thousands have moved south, but they face the very real prospect of having to move again. Certainly, Israel's Prime Minister seems determined to continue the war, whatever happens to the hostages.
In the last few days, I hear a question. If, after this phase of returning our abductees is exhausted, will Israel return to fighting? So my answer is an unequivocal yes. There is no chance that we won't resume the fighting until the end.
Of course, the ceasefire has been entirely dependent on the release of hostages from Gaza and Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails. The latest group of hostages to be released have been handed over and ferried back across the border. This complex process has been remarkably successful, with negotiators staying in continuous touch with Israel and Hamas. Further extensions to the ceasefire are being discussed, but it is far from a done deal. The fate of the Bibas family, and in particular 10-month-old Kafir and his 4-year-old brother Ariel, has captured the attention of Israelis since their abduction. Now, though, the military wing of Hamas claims the boys and their mother Shiri were killed in an Israeli airstrike. It hasn't been verified, but the Israeli military says they're investigating the reports. It's another episode in a sequence of events that's traumatizing this country. Well, there's a place setting for every one of the hostages. If you can't see a human image on the back of the chair, it means they've come home. They're either in hospital or back with their families. But there are still many hostages left in Gaza. Nobody knows when this whole hostage saga is going to end. Israeli security forces have continued their raids in the West Bank. CCTV shows youths in a street moments before one of them was shot. The Ramallah Health Ministry says 2 children were killed in the raids. Since the October 7th Hamas attack, movement on the streets of the West Bank has been heavily restricted. It's tense here, tense in Gaza, and nobody knows what will happen next.
And Stuart joins us live now from Jerusalem. So, Stuart, this is the sixth day when we've seen this exchange between hostages and Palestinian prisoners. There were delays sometimes, but by and large, it's been successful. But the pause, the truce, is meant to end in a couple of hours. Do we know if it's going to be extended?
Well, it could be. The negotiators are saying that talks are still taking place, and the mood music we've had throughout the day has been fairly confident that a deal would be done. I would say that Israel's made it abundantly clear to Hamas that if they continue to release 10 hostages at a time, then the truce will be extended. However, it is worth remembering that when this current scheduled swap is finished, that is, as it stands now, it's all over. And the fighting could start again at any time, probably into the early part of the morning, if there is no deal that has been made. I think the Prime Minister was in my report there, making it quite clear that at some point he intends to go back to the war with Hamas because he wants to completely destroy them and dismantle them, and that is every expectation in Israel that is what is going to happen. So the negotiators have got a lot of work to do tonight and now into the early hours of the morning to try and get some sort of deal so that this extension can actually be realised. And perhaps, the indicators we're getting from the Israeli side is they think there's about another 2 or 3 days of hostages left with Hamas, and they would be prepared to have that ceasefire as long as the hostages are being released. But I imagine, with the negotiators, it's going to be pretty tense because, as I say, when this current exchange ends, that is, according to the original agreements, the end of it.
Stuart Ramsey with the latest there from Jerusalem. Stuart, thank you. The makers of baby formula have been accused of increasing their profitability during the cost of living crisis. A review by the competition watchdog found companies, including the suppliers of other branded goods, including baked beans and mayonnaise, have raised prices faster than their costs have gone up. Some branded manufacturers for items such as infant formula, beans, mayonnaise, and pet food have seen an increase in net profits of 7.5%. And even own label manufacturers have seen an increase in profits of 4.5%. It's a similar story for other items such as bread, ready meals, and lemonade, with branded products seeing a jump of 2% in profits. And the own branded manufacturers are also seeing the extra revenue with an even bigger increase in profits of 3.5%. But it's those increases in baby formula that have driven some parents to make desperate choices. Sky's national correspondent Tom Parmenter reports.
Parents have long known the struggle to afford baby formula. It is an essential product for some, and it's risen 25% in the last 2 years. But the Competition and Markets Authority says baby formula manufacturers have increased prices more than their production costs have risen, hitting families hard.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating seeing these mums struggling, not being able to provide just because of the price of things. It's not nice to see. Heartbreaking.
And you'd like that price to be taken out of the equation?
Yeah, fully, and I think it needs to be free.
It has gone extraordinarily expensive, and can't see the reason why, really.
I'd say lower it, cap it, make sure that families have actually got a chance to live.
This year, Sky News uncovered the effects this is having, how parents are watering down formula, stealing tubs or buying second-hand open formula milk online, putting their baby's health and development at risk, as formula companies make healthy profits on products that nutritional experts say all do the same job.
All first infant formula products are essentially interchangeable. They're nutritionally comparable, and the law requires this. So they can be made from different ingredients, but at the end of the day, they must meet the strict legal requirements for nutrition composition to support safe and adequate growth and development.
The two biggest manufacturers have an 85% share of the market. Danone, who make Aptamil, as well as Cow & Gate, say they're working hard to absorb costs and minimise price rises. Nestlé, who make the SMA brands, say they've only increased costs as a last resort. Kendamil are the one British-based manufacturer. Their prices have risen too, but they acknowledge the formula market that they are part of isn't working for families.
We would welcome more competition. We think families should have more choice in this industry. And we would also question some of the regulation, which in our opinion perpetuates the status quo. It allows these multinationals like Denona and Nestle to continue their dominance. We want to work more closely with the government. We think there should be more choice in the market. We think prices shouldn't be as high as they are.
The CMA review looked at other groceries like baked beans, mayonnaise and pet food. The same things are happening there, but you can get cheaper own brand tins of beans. You can't always do that with infant milk. Parents need solutions from an industry that is under more scrutiny than ever before. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Greater Manchester.
A book about the royal family has been pulled from the shelves in the Netherlands over what the publisher has described as a translation error. A copy of the Dutch version of Endgame, seen by Sky News, identifies the family members who allegedly questioned the colour of Harry and Meghan's son's skin. A warning: this report from our royal correspondent Laura Bundock contains flash photography.
Same title, same author, but these two books tell a very different story.
Bronnen vertellen aan Omid Scobie.
With a Dutch plot twist that's resurfaced a British royal race row. And it's all about this incendiary interview.
Also concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
What?
And
who is having that conversation with you? What?
That conversation I'm never going to share. But at the time it was awkward. I was a bit shocked.
Their comments caused controversy and created a crisis within the palace. We never knew who made the offensive remarks until perhaps now. The Dutch version of a new book names names. By mistake, the author Omid Scobie claims.
I edited and wrote the English version. There's never been a version that I've produced that has names in it.
The book describes letters sent between Charles and Meghan after her Oprah interview. The English edition says, but in the pages of these private letters, two identities were revealed. Laws in the United Kingdom prevent me from reporting who they were. But the Dutch version is different, reading, but in those private letters, the identity emerged and was confirmed, and we've redacted the name mentioned. It comes up again in the Dutch book here. Meghan and Charles by letter discussed probable unconscious bias within the family after it was revealed that, and again we've redacted the two names, took part in such conversations about Archie. This whole section isn't in the English version. Copies of the Dutch book have been cleared from shops, and the journalist who spotted royal names revealed believes lawyers tried to prevent this detail being published.
I think they sent it to all the translators all over the world who were translating the manuscript, except for one country, the Netherlands. We're quite small, so easily overlooked. I don't know.
Overlooked or lost in translation, it's another reminder Harry and Meghan have left royal life, but still make headlines and uncomfortable reading for the royal family. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
World leaders are gathering in Dubai to kick off the UN's climate change conference, COP28. While King Charles will be in attendance, US President Joe Biden will not, with a spokesperson saying he's focused on the conflict between Israel and Hamas. And the hosts are facing criticism, as our science and technology editor Tom Clark now reports.
Financial Centre. To many, Dubai is a dubious choice to host a climate summit. It owes its existence to oil money. That and energy-hungry air conditioning. The desert heat can hit 50 degrees. And before the global climate talks have even begun, the summit's president, also CEO of the national oil company, has been forced to counter reports that as hosts, they were planning to use a meeting about cutting emissions to cut deals with other producers.
These allegations are false, not true, incorrect, and not accurate. and it's an attempt to undermine the work of the COP28 presidency.
The story the United Arab Emirates wants to tell is of its leadership in clean energy. This is the Masdar Al Dhafra solar plant, completed just ahead of COP28. It's 7 kilometres across and for now is the largest single-site solar farm in the world. Globally, the UAE has invested some $200 billion in clean energy, and the state oil firm ADNOC is investing billions more, cutting emissions from its oil and gas production. This solar plant stretches literally as far as the eye can see, and it's 4 million solar panels were bolted together in just 10 months. And that makes it kind of hard to doubt the UAE's commitment to clean energy. But the amount it spends on renewables, even at this scale, is dwarfed by their investments in fossil fuels. So you can see why people question their claim that they and other oil-rich countries can be part of a solution to the climate crisis. Something I put to ADNOC director Musaba Al-Kabi. When do we see it shift? When are you going to pivot and accelerate that transition?
It is in the interest of everyone that we keep investing and double down on the renewable. We are doing all of the above. Renewables, solar, wind, we're expanding in carbon capture, we're expanding in hydrogen.
But you're still expanding in oil and gas.
But look at the
and that's what the science says we just can't carry on doing.
Yeah, the reality is the world needs energy. The climate targets by 2050 or early, I think these are challenging targets. Let's acknowledge that.
Do you think they can be met?
I strongly believe that they can be met. Let's not underestimate when we come together, we act. Let's not underestimate when there is a clear and present danger, we respond.
Stark language from an oil executive, but the danger's increasing. Despite a rush to renewables and 28 years of talks, emissions are still going up, not down. The UAE wants to use its presidency to inject pragmatism into the climate talks, but by refusing to signal the end of the line for fossil fuels, it's hard to see how they succeed. Tom Clark, Sky News, Dubai.
And I want to bring you some breaking comments from President Biden, who's been speaking about the latest hostage releases that we have seen of Israeli hostages in Gaza as he was about to board Air Force One.
We've got some very good news to report. Layat Benin is safe in Egypt. She's crossed the border. I talked with her mother and father. They're very appreciative and things are moving well. She'll soon be home with her 3 children. That's all I have to say for right now.
Can you give us a sense of other Americans who might be being
Thanks, everybody. And that was U.S. President Joe Biden as he's about to board Air Force One, reacting to the release of hostages that we have seen in Gaza. We've seen 10 Israelis cross the Rafah crossing into Egypt. Just a few minutes ago, President Biden was speaking about American hostage Layat Benin, who he's saying is now safe in Egypt. And President Biden has also spoken about the possible extension of the ceasefire, although we still have no word as to whether it will be extended. The COVID inquiry has heard how a senior medical official tried to warn the government that care homes would effectively become an overflow for hospitals as case numbers soared. Soon after, former Chancellor Sajid Javid said that he resigned from the job because he felt like Boris Johnson was not actually in charge. Here's our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen.
Right from the start, we've tried to throw a protective ring around our care homes.
Try and relax.
As COVID surged through Britain's care homes, tens of thousands of the most vulnerable would lose their lives.
The truth, the whole truth.
Jenny Harries was one of the most senior government health officials. In March 2020, she was asked in an email, "What should our approach be to allowing patients to be discharged into care homes who are symptomatic of COVID-19? It's a big ethical issue." She replied, "Whilst the prospect is perhaps what none of us would wish to plan for, I believe the reality will be that we will need to discharge COVID-19 patients into residential care. I do recognise that families and care homes will not welcome this.
It was a very bleak picture because I think the reality was this isn't an invitation to be discharging COVID patients. It's actually a reality that says if hospitals overflow, those who can benefit from treatment there will be there.
Last year, 2 women whose fathers died in care homes took the government to the High Court, where the failure to prevent transmission in March and April 2020 was ruled unlawful.
Tomorrow, the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock will face questions, including about what happened in care homes. His cabinet colleague Sajid Javid told the inquiry that Downing Street was dysfunctional and claimed that Prime Minister Boris Johnson was not really in charge.
Many times I felt like that many of the key decisions were being made by Mr Cummings and not the Prime Minister.
Are you going to apologise to the victims of COVID, Mr Raab?
Dominic Raab, who stood in for Boris Johnson when he became seriously ill with COVID, disagreed.
The broader question you raised about whether Boris Johnson was a puppet, I'm afraid I don't find that a serious allegation.
The former Deputy Prime Minister said he feared this inquiry had become a soap opera. Baroness Hallett, the chair, assured him that amid all the rude words, there are serious questions about the decisions made at the top of government, certainly from those who lived with the consequences. Tamara Cohen, Sky News at the COVID inquiry.
And tomorrow morning, we are expecting to hear from former Health Secretary Matt Hancock, who faces the COVID inquiry. It will be live here on Sky News from 10. Jurors in the Brianna Ghey murder trial have been shown footage of her leaving home for the last time. The 16-year-old, who was transgender, was stabbed to death in a park near Warrington on the 11th of February. Jurors were also told how the 2 teenagers accused of killing her made previous attempts on her life. Referred to as Girl X and Boy Y, the 2 sent WhatsApp messages where they discussed their plans to attack Brianna. Both deny killing the teenager. An inquest has heard that 4 teenage boys killed in a car crash last week drowned when their car overturned and became partially submerged in water. 6th form students Wilf Fitchett, Harvey Owen, Hugo Morris and Jevon Hurst were on their way back from a camping trip in North Wales when the crash happened. Nottingham has become the latest big city to suffer financial problems after the City Council there declared itself effectively bankrupt. The Labour-run local authority says it won't be able to balance the budget this year, which is a legal requirement. But a government minister said that Labour were unfit to govern the city. Our political correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan, explains.
A dismal day for one of Britain's largest local authorities. Nottingham City Council is short of £23 million and effectively bankrupt.
We are having real difficulties with paying for the needs of vulnerable adults and children in our care, where the market is broken, where the costs are increasing.
It's not alone. Following in the footsteps of Birmingham City Council, Nottingham is the second to declare effective bankruptcy this year, and the 9th since December 2021. Councils say they're facing a perfect storm of high inflation and rising demand for their services, while reeling from a decade of central government funding cuts. But back in Westminster, the government is looking for other explanations. Nottingham Council has been mired by a string of management scandals, but not everyone is convinced that this is simply down to local mismanagement.
Funding from the government is being slashed in areas that need it.
Perhaps it's just like a mismanagement from everyone.
I think it suits upstairs that far away from the people, you ain't got a clue what they're doing.
So who's to blame for all of this? Well, back in Westminster, the Conservative government is eager to pin this on what it calls the financial mismanagement of Labour-run councils. But local authorities of all stripes are struggling to cope with a sharp rise in their costs and a reduction in funding from central government.
From the conversations that I have with council leaders of all political persuasions, there will be more of these financial distress measures being executed, simply because councils are finding things unbearably difficult.
The political back and forth will continue, but it's residents that are picking up the tab. The council is now drawing up a new budget, and when it comes to some local services, the lights may well go out. Gurpreet Narwan, Sky News.
Last week, a daring rescue gripped much of the nation when a crane operator used a cage to rescue a workman who was trapped by a fire at a tower block in Reading. That crane operator, Glenn Edwards, has been hailed as a hero. Well, he spoke to Sky News earlier today. Here's Alice Porter.
When a fire quickly engulfed this building, crane operator Glenn Edwards wasted no time saving his colleague from the inferno.
I looked out on level 8 where he was, and he was waving his coat. And I said, yeah, there's someone on level 8. I said, get the cage on.
Glenn used his winch to move a cage towards the workman to climb into, but the conditions were challenging.
I've got a camera on my jib, right on the end of my jib, and I couldn't see nothing. I couldn't see him. The smoke was swirling around. And the banksman said, he's in, he's in. So, then I heard the crowd outside. They were all shouting as well. I could hear all that as well. So, yeah, and then up and away. The adrenaline was out the roof. When I put him back on the ground safe, and I just stood up, and I was shaky as hell, like,
jelly legs.
Oh yeah, jelly legs. The adrenaline. Yeah, and then climbed down 90 metres.
At its peak, more than 50 firefighters tackled the blaze, and 2 people were taken to hospital for smoke inhalation. This is the Station Hill development site, and the building behind me on the corner, you can see the scorch marks where the fire took place. But this is the second fire in 5 months on this building site. We don't know what caused this latest blaze, but the local MP has written to the health and safety regulator for them to investigate exactly what happened. Meanwhile, a fundraising page has been set up for Glenn, and more than £6,000 has been donated, with both strangers and family quick to congratulate his heroism.
My little lady's actually here, and yeah, she was very proud of me. She gave me a big hug when I got home, and I texted her when I was at work. I've just rescued a man from the building from a fire, but I don't think she realised that what I'd done.
Glenn hasn't yet met the man who he saved, but like all true British heroes, he just hopes his reward comes in the form of a pint together. Alice Porter, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Telegraph's deputy comment editor, Annabelle Denham. Now, among the stories we'll be discussing, this story on the front of the Telegraph, their headline, hostage baby died in Gaza, Hamas claims. We'll be right back.
5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, let's take a look at our top stories. A ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas is due to expire in the coming hours as international mediators work towards an extension. This evening, 10 Israeli and 4 Thai hostages have been released. We're still waiting for confirmation of the release of Palestinian prisoners. The makers of baby formula, baked beans and mayonnaise are being accused of increasing their profitability during the cost of living crisis, raising prices faster than their costs have gone up. And the COVID inquiry has heard a senior medical official try to warn the government that care homes would effectively become an overflow for hospitals as case numbers soared. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. So it's time to see what's making the headlines with the Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Telegraph's deputy comment editor, Annabelle Denham. Welcome both. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. On the front page of the Telegraph, it's covering the claims by Hamas that a 10-month-old baby held hostage has been killed in Gaza as Israel's prime minister pledges all-out war. The Daily Express's headline on that story, smile of an innocent lost in a war with no end. The Mirror's front page reports that A&E units are in crisis with more than half inadequate or needing improvement. The Financial Times hears that relations between the US and India are on uncertain ground after federal prosecutors sought to bring charges against an Indian official for plotting to kill a Sikh separatist in New York. And the I-Paper reports that the pensions triple lock is under threat from 2025, with neither Conservatives nor Labour committing to raising the state pension using the current policy after the next election. And the Metro cites a study claiming that 6 years after schoolgirl Molly Russell took her own life, technology companies are still deliberately aiming harmful content at young people. And according to the largest study of its kind, air pollution from fossil fuel use is killing 5 million people worldwide every year, a much higher toll than previously estimated. That is what The Guardian is focusing on. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the program, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we're joined tonight by Kevin Maguire and Annabelle Denham. Thank you again for being with us. OK, let's start with the front page of the Eye. State pension, and the title is UK pensions triple lock under threat from 2025. The government effectively being told to maybe rethink the state pension increases. Kevin, what did you make of it?
Yeah, the OECD, which represents really the industrial economies, surprisingly, I thought, it was very poor growth figures for the UK. Predicted the next 3 years, but comes out and seems to attack the triple lock. Look, it's the system by which the state pension will go up by the highest of inflation earnings, or 2.5%. It's going up in April by 8.5%. It's going up to a princely sum of £221.20. This is hardly a huge amount for people who've paid national insurance contributions to qualify for decades. It's a fraction of what people get in France and Germany and Spain. I just think it's a very odd target. Now, both Labour and the Conservatives have not yet committed for the next election to keeping it. But pensioners vote. Pensioners vote. But
the countries you quoted are also having issues with their own pensions.
Yeah, but they're all more than £221.20 a week, and that is after the 8.5% increase.
Annabelle?
Well, I have some sympathy with the position of the Tory party, particularly Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's saying that it's no longer affordable. The UK does not find itself in a strong fiscal position, far from it. GDP per capita is going in reverse. The Bank of England is warning that it's going to be some time before inflation comes down. And I think that there's fundamentally a problem with having a mechanism in place which ensures that pensioners always get the best deal at a time when young people are feeling extremely hard done by. There is a strong sense of profound intergenerational unfairness in the UK, and perhaps the state pension plays into that. The cost, of course, is absolutely vast to the Exchequer. It's around £112 billion a year at the moment. And you have to ask questions about how sustainable it is. Equally, when ever since it was introduced in 2010 by the coalition government, we've been having a debate over how sustainable the triple lock is, and yet it's still in play because it's politically very difficult to do anything about it, such as something radical like means testing.
OK, let's go to the Metro now. Page 4, let's see if we can pull it up. And it's about the food prices, crucially the ones for baby formula, obviously hugely emotive for a lot of parents. Parents are charged too much for baby formula. That's according to the watchdog. Annabelle.
Yes, so as you say, the Competition and Markets Authority have been looking into the prices of some basic goods in supermarkets. It has found that products like mayonnaise and baked beans, not the store-bought versions of them, but rather the more premium products, the branded products, have been going up, and the suggestion that there's overcharging ultimately going on. But there's a particular concern, of course, with the cost of formula, because it's something that parents may not have a choice in terms of needing to use it. It's not something they can substitute for another product. There are concerns that some parents are finding themselves watering it down or giving their babies porridge, and that's raising health issues, very profound health issues. So clearly this is something which needs to be addressed, but what we also need to look at, and Iceland raised this issue a couple of months ago, is the way in which government policy is actually driving up the cost of formula in some cases. We have very strict regulations around things like loyalty points. You can't put those towards formula, around things like using your Tesco Club card, for instance, about and about discounting formula that might be closer to going off. There are all sorts of rules and regulations about what supermarkets can and cannot do there, and that's because the government is concerned that anything otherwise might be encouraging people to use formula rather than for mothers to breastfeed. And I have some sympathy with that position, but we need to bear in mind that some people, it just isn't a choice.
There must be every reason to try and discourage its use when they're ripping off customers. What, 25% increase in 2 years? 3 in 4 firms raise prices faster than costs to increase profits, and 2 companies control 85% of the market. That's a monopoly that I think needs regulation rather than backing off. I think you're absolutely not right. A feather duster.
Well, I think we need to have more competition in the sector, but of course the investment, the R&D that is required in order to create formula is absolutely massive. We are starting perhaps gradually to see some challengers enter into the market, but one hopes that would bring down the cost. But no, ultimately, it costs a lot of money for producers to manufacture formula. They have to, as I say, put a lot of research into it. They have to use high-quality ingredients. There are strict regulations as well. There should be, given this is what we're going to be giving to babies, perhaps as a breast milk substitute. But equally, it's very expensive, and that's problematic.
But 3 in 4 increasing prices faster than cost has got to be profiteering.
Well, I mean, that's certainly the conclusion that the Competition and Markets Authority has come to. But let's not bear in mind that before we entered into this inflationary period, there weren't these concerns about profiteering brands or indeed profiteering supermarkets, because we've heard a lot about that over the last few months.
Greedflation, I think it's called, isn't it?
Greedflation. But yet that seems to have only started happening around the time that inflation began to soar.
Well, I think there's a greater focus on it now when people are really feeling the pinch in the cost of living crisis.
Let's take a look at the front page of the Telegraph. Another story about babies. This one, obviously, desperately sad. Hostage baby died in Gaza, Hamas has claimed. This is the youngest hostage taken, a little boy just 10 months old. And Hamas has said that his 4-year-old brother and his mother died. Now, Hamas is claiming in an Israeli attack. Obviously, we have no way of verifying it. The IDF say they're investigating, but it's deeply, deeply upsetting.
Well, it's just terrible. Kevin and I were talking about this before. Kevin has a very young grandchild. I have a 1-year-old. It's unimaginable. It's difficult to look at the photographs and to read these stories. Of course, our thoughts are with the family, are with the Israeli people, you know, that they're expecting more information on this in the coming hours. The question, of course, that's connected to all of this, brought out on the front page of the Telegraph, is when will fighting be resumed, and what lengths is the Israeli government going to be going to in order to eradicate Hamas? And Benjamin Netanyahu has been unequivocal here in saying that there will be a return to all-out war. And after this hiatus, after this pause in hostilities and fighting, you wonder how people in the West, in particular Western governments, are going to respond to Israel launching another attack on
Because the truce is due
Gaza.
to end, and we haven't heard anything so far about it being extended. It should end in a few hours.
No, absolutely. And those pictures are just very, very difficult and painful to see, but we have to read the stories, because these are people, and to remind ourselves of that. And you look at Kafir Bibas there, his mother died, his 4-year-old brother too, don't know what's happened to the father who was taken hostage, should never have been taken hostage. I mean, it's just inhuman. And Hamas, of course, are claiming the Israelis killed, but that's claiming, that's not been corroborated. Sure. But interestingly, Joe Biden is calling for restraint when the fighting resumes, as he's quoted here in the Telegraph, to say to continue down the path of terror, violence, killing and wars, to give Hamas what they seek. We can't do that. Look, babies are being killed on the Palestinian side too. We've seen some of the pictures and very distressing scenes of parents. Mums and dads on both sides are mourning and grieving and trying to avoid more of that. I think it's very
And you mentioned President Biden. We've just heard that Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has just landed in Israel. And of course, the Americans do seem to be pushing for at least an extension of the ceasefire. OK, let's finish this segment with the Mirror, page 1. The NHS in crisis, nightmare at A&E. Annabelle.
Yes, so this is the news that 107 out of 197 A&E units have failed to meet basic standards, and of course we're expecting this to get worse as we go into winter. The ambulance queues outside hospitals are only going to get longer, and the NHS is in such a perpetual state of crisis now that it's almost daily that we're reading stories about, today it was about delayed diagnoses because there's been a continuation of GP virtual appointments, perhaps because they haven't got the capacity to see patients face to face. That's leading to delayed diagnoses and worse outcomes for patients. Today we're reading about nightmares at A&E. And it's quite frankly terrifying, and we have to ask very serious questions about what needs to be done in order to fix our healthcare service so that we can prevent this.
And as the Mirror points out, worse to come with winter, of course, the winter surge.
1 in 9 patients now at A&E waiting longer than 12 hours. 12 hours if you're in A&E because you're ill, injured, sick in whatever way. It must be almost unbearable. But people are dying as a result of these waits. The doctors have admitted that much, and somehow fixing it isn't going to be easy. You've got to. We've got record waiting lists. There's a shortage of staff, and it's just not functioning. We can't continue.
You've got to fix it for the patients, but it's for the people who work in the NHS as well, those frontline staff who are trapped in this failed system, working under impossibly difficult circumstances, often not being able to do what they've been trained to. It's them who I expect will be
dispiriting.
Exactly.
You're working in the NHS. Yeah.
Annabelle, Kevin, we're going to leave it there for now. We'll be back soon. And The Guardian splashes with the astonishing impact that air pollution has on people's health. We'll discuss that next.
when people actually see it in person, when thousands of people came along to our Christmas lights switch on and really enjoyed the event, and they saw it all lit up, they saw all the coverage that the media have given it. They've just learned to love it. They see it as quirky and funny, very much like the people of March themselves. Well, it would take more than a couple of beer mats, I think, to straighten up our tree. The fact is that it's put in place perfectly straight. The problem is that the tree that we were delivered has got a bend in its trunk. So although it looks like it's leaning over, it's actually in the ground perfectly straight. So there's nothing wrong with the way that it was installed, which sadly, many of the people on Facebook who first complained about it assumed that it had been put in incorrectly. It would be nice for our lovely market town of March to get this much publicity next year, because there's so much going on here. On Saturday, we've got our Christmas market from 10 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon. I hope lots of people will come along to that and they can see the tree for themselves.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me once again, Kevin Maguire and Annabelle Denham. Okay, let's take a look at some more of the front pages. Let's go to The Guardian and their headline, air pollution from fossil fuels kills 5 million people a year, which actually is more than they thought. It's still died from fossil fuels, and all of this on the eve of the COP28 climate summit.
Yeah, it's a report in the British Medical Journal, most extensive study on this, and I suppose to put it into some context, figures are about 1.3 million are killed around the world but in road accidents. Malaria kills nearly 3 million, and air pollution is claiming more than both combined, if this report is accurate. Fossil fuels responsible for 61%, according to this, of all those who die from air pollution. So it does, the threat of climate change is there in terms of raising the temperature and the impact on the planet. But there's also, once you burn oil and coal, gas, you are producing pollution that does kill.
Yes, it's a stark warning of the health effects of climate change, which have been, I think, for a long time, throughout this debate, have been slightly sidelined, but are so important. We all want cleaner air. The question, I think, is how we achieve it and whether great climate jamborees like COP28 the way to achieve it.
Probably not 28 now. Isn't it just a sales, a sales
nearly...
trade fair for the United Arab Emirates to try and sell more their carbon fuels, isn't it?
But in a way, that part of the world has felt the increasing heat more keenly than where we are. So, but I guess you're not optimistic about COP28.
No. Are you? Is anybody?
Was it? It was COP26 when Boris Johnson said we're at 1 minute to midnight. So I'm not sure how many seconds to midnight we are now. But no, this is nearly 30 years that this has been happening. 10 years since the Paris Agreements, and I'm not sure anybody believes that we're going to reach that target of 1.5%.
That 1.5% from in pre-industrial times. I think we just topped 1.2 of it. So we are getting close to it. But you can see that it's weather extremes, isn't it? And you can see it's happening in the UK. We've broken lots of records. That's what we're doing.
40 degrees last summer, I think. But interestingly, Rishi Sunak has also walked back on some of his promises regarding climate recently.
Yes, that's right. Watered down some of the targets that he'd set in order to reach net zero here in the UK by 2050, such as delaying the ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars to 2035, which brings it in line, actually, with the EU target. And it was an interesting week that we had back in the summer, the net zero week, and it looked as though Rishi was going to be putting his marker in the sand and really coming out and trying to get some momentum behind the Conservative Party, put clear blue water between the Tories and Labour, try and win over or at least retain some voters from the 2019 election. And that's all rather fizzled out. And now this week we're talking about the Elgin
Well, it just did. It angered car manufacturers, and most voters actually do value the environment.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how it affects him in the election. Someone who doesn't have to worry about the elections is on page 16 of the Metro, Kim Jong-un, election shock as he wins just 99.9% of the votes. You do wonder, it's a brave person that, or, you know, whoever that 0.1% was that voted against him.
I know. You have to, if you're voting for him, you put your ballot paper in the green for ghoul box. If you're against him, in the red for no. And then I suppose you get a one-way ticket to a camp, I would have thought.
An insight into democracy in North Korea.
Mind you, that 0.1% he didn't get is probably more than Sunak would get at the moment, isn't it?
It's not polling very well, that's for sure. 20 points behind.
You know, we can be lighthearted about it, but the truth is that you still have a country like that where effectively they go through the motions of an election. But there's... It's
interesting they feel the need to have these sham elections to give this impression of authority. Yeah, because of course you're right. It's totally authoritarian. It's a horrible place. Most people are living in poverty and are absolutely terrified of him.
I suppose this exercise would then prove that people are on his side, and
that's what he wants.
Well, it's a way of consolidating his power, which is almighty already. And Putin will be having elections shortly in Russia as well, and one expects that they will have a similar result. And as you say, you have to wonder what the point of the exercise is really.
Presumably more
certainly
internal
not democratic
than external, because no one outside of North Korea would really take that seriously.
No.
Annabelle, Kevin, thank you so much. We'll look through some more papers later on. For the moment, thank you.